Welcome to Moments with Marylin. I'm your host, Marylin Boyer, the mom of 14 homeschool kids who love the Lord and love each other. I absolutely love young moms, and it's my passion to help you on your journey and give you tips and tools to make it easier for you. Today we have a very special guest with us. It is my husband, Rick Boyer. Some of you may know him as convention speaker. He's spoken at almost every state and several countries and at churches for years, many years. You also might know him as an author. He started in 1993, I think is when you wrote your first book. He wrote books for parents, and then we've written books for kids as well. The most recent one that we wrote for kids is The Fight for Freedom, which is about the War of Independence. And wow, this is a really cool history book that tells the stories of the people who actually lived during the War for Independence. So it's told from like a biographical kind of format. So, but today we are going to talk to Uncle Rick, the family storyteller. Tell us what you do, Uncle Rick.
Well, I do some storytelling, make some recordings. Most of my recordings, though, are audio books.
Okay. Why do you do that?
Because audiobooks are great for kids, and because I love it. I like to record the scripture and explain what it means and how it's to be applied. That's the purpose of it. I like to read a lot of American history because there's so much great stuff out there. And we'll talk more about the content of that in a little bit.
Okay. So what is the Uncle Rick Audio Book Club?
The Uncle Rick Audio Book Club is a system we came up with to make great audio books more affordable and convenient for parents. The way it works is you join the club at unclerickaudios.com. You give your credit card number and you're charged $10 a month, and you get to download 2 great audio books of your choice each month.
How do they differ from other audiobooks?
Well, Uncle Rick, as you know, is a very informal type, and I do my recording not in a soundproof professional studio, but in my office, which is a plywood shack on my friend's farm. And down at that farm, I keep my horses and occasionally some cattle, and we've got a garden down there, and we are allowed pretty much free use of the place, which is really nice. And because it's not a soundproof studio, a lot of times the sounds of the farm will intrude their way into my recordings. And when they do, I just make use of them. And if something interesting happens on the farm that I happen to see out the window as I'm recording, I'll bring that into the recording too. I might stop right in the middle of a sentence and say, "Oh, look at that. Oh, I wish you were here, little buddies. I just saw the biggest fat old fox run across the pond bank down there. He was so pretty, so bright red." And all my recordings open with the rather corny greeting. "Hey, little buddies, it's Uncle Rick coming to you from the little house in the pasture, where you can hear the birds sing, the cows moo, the horses neigh, and Uncle Rick talk to his little buddies." The idea is to make the kid feel like he's right there in the little house with Uncle Rick being read to personally.
Great. What kind of books do you read?
Well, of course, I started out with scripture, recording the Bible for my own kids so they could memorize it. And then I began to add editorial comments to the scriptures so that they could understand and apply them. I think one of my favorite examples of that was one of the stories I told. I was reading to some of the kids, and I can't remember if you were present or not one evening, but I came into the 6th chapter where it talks about how the wicked man winks with his eyes, points with his fingers, and signals with his feet. And our youngest son, Tuck, who was a little guy at that time, stopped me and said, "What does that mean?" So I said, okay. All right, there's these 2 burglars, see, and they want to rob this wealthy old lady's house, and they're talking about how they're going to get in. So the one guy says, "I got an idea. I'll knock on her door, tell her I do yard work, offer to do her yard for half on anybody else to do it for. Work there a couple afternoons a week, watch her, get to know her schedule, get to know her routine. And then one day, when she's gone, and I know she'll be gone a while, I tell you, you go around, back door, break in, get the silver and get gone, while I'm out in plain view of all the neighbors clipping the hedges. They'll think I couldn't have had a thing to do with it." Now you have to remember, he asked me this before the days of cell phones. So the other crook says, "Well, how are you going to tell me? We can't be seen talking over the fence." So the first guy says, simple, we'll make up a code. Wink of the eye means one thing, point of the fingers means something else, moving of the feet means something else. Nobody will know but us. Moral of the story, kids, when you hear two people talking in a way they don't want others to understand, watch out for evil motives. So that's how I record the scriptures, in a way that the kids can understand it and apply. And I've done Proverbs and 50 favorite Psalms, the book of James, the book of Acts, and several others, as you know. Now, that's the Bible. When I read history books, excuse me, I didn't write them all. Here's one, Patrick Henry, Firebrand of the Revolution. Boring cover, but absolutely dynamite, true story of one of our greatest Americans. And I'll make editorial comments as I go through. If I see somebody, and of course I always major on character. If I see somebody exhibiting courage, I'll say, oh, well, wasn't Patrick Henry courageous to take that stand? Or if I see somebody being kind to somebody else, I'll say, boy, that is a real example of compassion, little buddies. I hope you treat your younger brothers and sisters that way when you have the chance. So that's kind of the way it is. And then once in a while, too, I'll bring in something real personal. Like, I had an experience like that one time. Just like I read to my own kids and now read to my own grandkids.
So these are old books. Why do you use old books?
Well, there's the first practical reason that you don't have to get copyright permission because they're not under copyright anymore. But once I got started recording these old books, I found out, you know what? These books are better. They're 100 times better. If you go into the public library now, and I assume most school libraries, you're going to see a lot of junk for kids to read. You're going to see themes that we do not appreciate. You're going to see rebellion, you're going to see sensuality, you're going to see bad motives, you're going to see materialism, you're going to see a lot of the occult. If you look at the youth and children's sections in most libraries, they're just wastelands. But 100 years ago, 150 years ago, people were writing books that taught character to kids. They're just so much better stuff. A lot of what I record, of course, is history. And these old books tell the truth about American history, like, here's the one, Squanto and the Pilgrims. Yeah, there really was a guy named Squanto, and he really was an American Indian. He was kidnapped and taken to England, and there he learned the English language, finally made his way back to North America to find that his whole tribe had been wiped out by disease, and he was all alone. But when the Pilgrims came in 1620, he went and met them. He became their friend. He had become a Christian while in Europe. And he and Governor Bradford were very close friends. And he served as a translator, interpreter to speak to the other Indian tribes. He served in helping them learn farming methods that worked in the New World. Introduced new crops like corn, new game like turkeys that the Englishmen were not familiar with. He helped them to survive their first couple of difficult winters. These are historical facts, and we're not taught those things anymore. Nathan Hale, he's another good history example. He was a young Connecticut school teacher who volunteered for the American Army in the War of Independence. He rose to the rank of captain, and when George Washington needed information on the British fortifications in the city of New York, which they held at that time, he volunteered to go in dressed as a schoolmaster looking for work and to take notes on what was going on in the British camp and return to General Washington with that information. But he was found out, he was hung as a spy. And his last words really had quite a passionate feel to them. He said, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." When I was a kid in school, every school child could tell you who said those words. Nowadays, hardly anybody knows it. So you go back to the old books and you get the truth about American history. Back to the Pilgrims, modern history says that the English came over here, the Pilgrims landed and immediately began to slaughter the inhabitants. That is a lie. That is so far from the truth. The fact is that between Squanto and Samoset, the Pilgrims arranged a treaty with the local Indians that lasted for 50 years. And 50 years later, when the chief of the Indians who had made the treaty with the Pilgrims died, then his son, who was called King Philip, went to war with the Puritans. But it was the Indians that started that war, not the English. So you go to the old books, you get the truth, and you get the values. And that's what I like best about the old books.
Tell me why you do so much history. A lot of what you record is history. Why is that important?
True. I do a lot of history. I do some good fiction. I do a lot of historical fiction. But the reason that I record so much history is, number one, I love history, especially American history. We live in the greatest country that's ever graced the face of the earth. And I love it and I appreciate it. And I want my little buddies to love it and appreciate it too. And when you teach them the truth about history, they're inspired to love their country and to live up to the example of the great heroes of American history. One thing that's different about today from 100 years ago is that today we tend to glorify people who make a lot of noise, who are bitter and angry about things, and who like to complain and blame others for their problems. But long ago, and not so very long ago, even certainly in my lifetime, I can remember when our heroes were people who did great things for others, often at great sacrifice to themselves. And that's the kind of people that I want my children and grandchildren to look up to. That's the kind of people I look up to. And it's so sad that kids today don't know. With cancel culture being so prevalent in our country now, I can tell you something about anybody that wants to pull down a statue of Robert E. Lee. I know one thing in advance. They've never read a biography of Robert E. Lee. Same thing with George Washington and so many other people that some people are trying to cancel now. They don't want us to know our history. Ultimately, the reason for that is because they want to change our country from a republic to a socialist tyranny. And to do that, they have to amplify all the problems in America. And we do have problems. We've always had problems. We're people. We're a nation of people. And people are sinners and they do things wrong. But American history is a history of a nation that has done things no other nation has done for better reasons. Even today, when there's a tsunami off in Asia somewhere and thousands of people are killed, it's Christian America, not some Islamic country that rushes over there with aid. America is a force for good in the world, has been since the beginning. We've made our mistakes because we're people, and those things shouldn't be varnished over. We should tell the truth about that. But what we should also always tell our children is, number one, America is a great country. Number two, that's because God established it. And if you learn real history, you learn that fact. Our nation came into being as a result of the Great Awakening. When George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards and John Wesley were all preaching in the fields to groups of 20 and 30 and 50,000 people, that was the birth of America. When people came to learn what God is really like, that God is king, God is sovereign, not the king. And so that's why America came into being. And if you ask people like Samuel Adams, they'll tell you in their histories that it wasn't the politicians that started the American War of Independence, it was the preachers. But how are our kids ever going to know these things if they only read the new history books in school that teach that America's just a racist nation, always has been? It's a lie.
So, Uncle Rick, tell us a story.
Oh, a story. Well, there's so many, it's hard to pick one. I could talk about Jake DeShazer, World War II soldier who was captured by the Japanese and tortured for 3.5 years and then got out at the end of the war and went to Japan as a missionary, trying to lead people to Christ that he had once hated because they tortured him. You could tell about Robert Shurtleff, the Revolutionary War soldier who fought for, 2 or 3 years as an American soldier before they found out that he was really a she. A girl named Deborah Sampson who wanted to fight for freedom, but she couldn't because she's a girl, so she disguised herself. I could talk about Nancy Hart, the Georgia mom who protected her children from the Tories by shooting them as they crossed the creek, and who once captured 5 Tories when they came to try to capture her patriot husband. A lot of exciting stories. One of my favorites, I would have to say, is the old story of Washington crossing the Delaware. This is before the brutal winter at Valley Forge. In fact, it's the very beginning of that winter when Washington had had a few victories and many more defeats, and had crossed the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. And he knew that he needed to strike a blow against the British. He needed a big victory because with the conditions being so bad in his army, his men starving, freezing, short on everything from clothes to medicines, certainly to food, men were deserting and going back to their families. People having to go to war and leave their families at home, sometimes very desperate conditions. And these men, they needed some motivation, some encouragement that their cause could actually be won. They were discouraged. And so he came up with the plan of crossing back over the Delaware River and attacking the enemy at Trenton, New Jersey.
When did he do that?
When did he do that? That's an interesting point. It was Christmas. A Christmas story of George Washington. He determined that he would wait until Christmas Day, when the enemy, which in this case were mostly Hessians, not British. Okay, this was a Hessian encampment in Trenton, and there were several thousand Hessian soldiers there. These were Germans that had come over as mercenaries to fight for the British against the Americans. And Washington was going to allow them a nice peaceful Christmas to eat and drink and get lazy, and then during the night to cross the river and attack by surprise. He knew against the formidable numbers of the Hessians, the only way he could win was by surprise attack. And so on the night of December 25th, he crossed the river. It was partly choked with ice. In fact, he divided his army, and he led part of them over in one place, and farther downstream, a couple other generals were going to cross there. But the river was so choked with ice at that point, they couldn't get across. And so now Washington's forces greatly reduced, even though it had already been outnumbered by the Hessians. So with the help of the Marblehead fishermen from Maine, these guys knew how to paddle boats. And they maneuvered all those hundreds of men and horses and 2,000-pound artillery pieces across that ice-choked river. Some men rowing with oars, some men pushing chunks of ice out of the way with poles. And finally he got his reduced army over to the other side. When they did, they had a 9-mile march through snow and sleet to reach Trenton. And they were there much later than they expected. He wanted to be there while it was still dark. But the sun had begun to come up when they finally reached there. But their surprise did work, and they did overwhelm Trenton. They drove the Hessians out, and then they captured them on the other side.
Love that story. And as we say, that happened Christmas night. So through the years, with our 14 kids, we always struggled to find Christmas gifts for our kids that were meaningful and that were more than just toys that would break the next week. So tell us how Uncle Rick can help parents find a meaningful Christmas gift for their kids that'll last.
Yeah, I may be a little prejudiced about this, but I think a membership in the Uncle Rick Audiobook Club would be a great gift. All the family can enjoy it. I've had 2 different adults tell me that they were driving alone in their car listening to Uncle Rick, and they ended up at the wrong place. One girl was on her way to church, I think, and she ended up at college instead. And the adult man did the same thing. I think it's a great gift because it gives children the gift of Scripture, read in a way that they will understand and they can learn how to apply it in real life, which to me is very important. Yeah. And also the gift of history. If we don't know where we came from, we don't know where we're headed. And a big part of our country's problems today is that young people are not growing up with an appreciation of what America means. And they're being deceived into accepting something else, which is not nearly as good as what God gave us through our founding fathers. It's also giving them the gift of character, because I always try to read with character training in mind. These books, these old books, were written in a time when people wanted young people to grow up to be good people, not just smart people, not just successful people, but godly people. And so I try to read with that in mind and make application of things even as I go. So Scripture, history, character. I think these are great gifts to give your kids. And they last and last and last. Even if you only join for 6 months or a year, whatever, all those books stay with you. They belong to you. You keep them. You can copy them on CDs if you want to.
Yeah.
And if Johnny wants to listen to the story of George Washington in his room, at the same time Jimmy wants to listen to the story of Washington in his room, burn them on CDs, make another copy for the car, whatever you want to do. For $10 a month, 2 of these wonderful old books, that's quite a deal.
So how do you join? Somebody wants to join and do this for their kids for Christmas, or even another family, or if grandparents would like to give it to their kids for Christmas, how do you?
All you've got to do is go to UncleRickAudios.com. Yeah, just go to UncleRickAudios.com. You can sign up right there with your credit card. You don't have to sign up for a year, any particular period of time. You can stop anytime you want to, but I don't think you'll want to.
We do have gift subscriptions too, so that you can gift it to somebody else. And for the month of December, from now until the month of through the month of December, we are offering $130 worth of digital products when you sign up on the Uncle Rick Audio Club site. Now, what are these digital products? Our kids absolutely loved the Cowboy Sam books. There are 12 of these books that we have in the package. Our kids and now our grandkids, they come over, they'll grab a Cowboy Sam book and we will read them to the kids. They are no longer in print, so we offer them as a package, 12 of these as a digital download. So we've got Cowboy Sam. We've also got the Discovery series, which tell about, you've been reading some of these to Autumn and the kids when they come over.
The Discovery books. These are biographies. This one here is Eli Whitney. He was the mechanic that invented the cotton gin, revolutionized agriculture. They've got some great illustrations in them. And just a real glimpse into American history, the way people lived, and they really help children to appreciate what history is all about and what people were all about.
And they're kind of short enough. The grandkids will come over and they'll, "Granddad, read us a story," so we'll go down and get it. It takes maybe, 10 or 15 minutes to read through this book. But we've got Lafayette, Benjamin Franklin, Buffalo Bill, Florence Nightingale, Eli Whitney, Daniel Boone, John Paul Jones, George Washington Carver, Francis Scott Key, Kit Carson, Lafayette. All of these are in that package. There's 10 of these, 12 of the Cowboy Sam. And then there's also the Uncle Rick holiday book digitally. Tell us
the
about
Uncle
that,
Rick holiday book. Now, she nagged me into this, okay? She got me to write a story about each one of several great holidays: Christmas, 4th of July, Memorial Day. Got to tell you about Memorial Day. It started out as a Confederate holiday in 1866. A year after the war ended, some ladies from the town of Columbus went out to the local cemetery and picked flowers and put these flowers on the graves of the Confederate soldiers. Well, then somebody said, "You know what? There's some Yankee boys buried here too that died in battle nearby, and they weren't buried at home where their moms and sisters and wives can come out and decorate their graves. Let's pick some flowers for them too." And so they did, and it became a custom all through the South on a certain day in the spring when the flowers were blooming to go out and put flowers on the graves of not only the Confederate soldiers but also whatever Union soldiers might be buried there. Well, they didn't do it on the same day because flowers don't bloom in Mississippi at the same time they bloom in Northern Virginia. And so they didn't have a particular day of the year. They just did it each day in the spring. But then the commander of the Northern Veterans group said, "That's a great idea. We ought to do that." And eventually they started to include the veterans of other wars too. You had the Spanish-American War later, and then World War I. And soon it became a national holiday. And that was more recently. But it's just such an interesting story that it was a bunch of ladies decorating the graves of the enemy as well as their own sons that brought about this great American holiday. And that's why Memorial Day is so special. You won't hear that, from a lot of sources. You'll hear that Well, it's the day we get a 3-day weekend and we all do picnics and parties and stuff. Much more to it than that. So anyway, by the time a year was up, I had written stories about all these important holidays, and my brilliant wife turned it into Uncle Rick's holiday book. It's got
So
a beautiful...
after a year.
Yeah, after a year, we automatically had a book. And you can see there's the story of the Independence Day there. Got some beautiful illustrations and
Beautiful illustrations.
yeah, on nice shiny magazine type paper. So
And a bunch
beautiful
of
book.
ideas of how to celebrate the holidays in a way that's meaningful. At the end of each holiday, we've got suggestions. So those digital products, $130 worth. This is partially what you will get in that package. And you'll get that from now until the month of December, just for joining the Uncle Rick Audio Club.
And I should add that not only is Uncle Rick Audio fun and interesting, aside from the historical content, the biblical content, your kids just learn from audiobooks.
Yep.
Children who listen to audiobooks will hear words that are above their grade level, quote unquote, being given in context. And sometimes I'll come to a word that even I don't know the meaning of, and I'll sit there and say, okay, little buddies, hold on just a minute. I'm going to look this up in my faithful old Webster's, and I keep an old Webster dictionary on my desk down at the farm.
Yeah.
And I'll say, okay, hubris. It sounds like humility. I want that hubris. Let me look that up. I look it up and say, oh, this means a person has too much self-confidence or personal pride. So that's what hubris means. So I'll even go to that extreme because I want them, number one, to know what words mean. But I also want to know how valuable a dictionary is. Even a paper dictionary with the old-fashioned paper and print is a great resource. And I want kids to be familiar with it and use it. But kids learn more of their language by far from context than they do from looking up words in a dictionary or memorizing vocabulary words or spelling words. When they hear a book read with expression, with enjoyment, and they hear these words and ideas in context, that's how we learn most of the words that we know anyway.
Yeah.
But this exposes, say, 10-year-old kids to books that normally a 10-year-old child might not read. And so it exposes them to words they're not familiar with, and from the context, from the inflection in the voice, and once in a while, even from the old Webster's, they learn what these words mean. At the same time, by hearing somebody else read aloud, hopefully with expression, they become better aloud readers themselves. So I think that audiobooks are just a tremendous learning tool. Not to mention the fact they require almost zero effort on the part of the parent. Mom and Dad love to read to the kids, but they're not always available. When they're not, Uncle Rick's right there, as close as your CD player, your computer, or whatever.
And the kids love it. And on the website, the kids can listen to samples. So every month you get to choose 2 audiobooks. They're your choice. We don't tell you what to choose. You get to choose. And we've got samples so you can listen, and the kids can choose, what do I want this month? So it makes it really fun for them. So anyway, we hope you will find this helpful. Tell us again, Uncle Rick, what the website is.
UncleRickAudios.com.
And we hope that helps you. We wish you a very Merry Christmas with your family this year.
Merry Christmas.